Hello, and welcome back to the Ship of Thesis and our Crusader Kings 3 DLC and patch announcements. And I am indeed very excited as Paradox Interactive have just announced the Northern Lords DLC Flavor Pack for Crusader Kings 3. So I have watched the Paradox Insider event, I've watched the feature breakdown video, I've scoured through all of their marketing material to find any little tidbits that I can put together and give you a comprehensive breakdown of all of the things that are going to be included with the DLC alongside the 1.3 patch. So without any further ado, let's get straight into the meat and potatoes of the content, shall we? And why don't we start off with their new trailer for the DLC?
Remember, there is more to these Northern Lords than meets the eye. Real strategy requires cunning.
Okay, so that looks pretty cool, doesn't it? And yeah, as I mentioned in the introduction, the 1.3 Corvus update patch is going to be landing alongside this DLC. So regardless of whether or not you want to purchase the DLC, you will be getting updates when this lands, basically. So it's going to include some changes to winter mechanics. It's going to include some poetry writing that have various in-game effects, as well as some dueling mechanics as well, and a whole heap of balance and bug fixes. If you're particularly interested in a deep dive breakdown of all of those features that are going to be included in the 1.3 Corvus update patch, I do already happen to have a video live on that very subject matter, and it should appear in the top right of the screen right about now. However, if you've already watched that, thank you very much, or you're not interested in it, then fear not. We are now going to surge onwards and talk specifically about what is going to be coming in the Northern Lords DLC. But first, you may be saying, well, when is this coming? Well, it's very exciting. It's coming really, really soon. It's going to land on the 16th of March. So that is literally 3 days from when I've recorded this video. So it's very exciting, and it's going to come with a whole bunch of really interesting, flavourful content. It is worth pointing out this is a flavour pack, so it is not a massive game-changing element. It just takes one corner of the world, a particular culture, in this case, the Norse culture, and really expands on it and adds extra depth into the game. So, what does it involve? Let's discuss it further. So I've broken this down into 3 main areas that you can expect the Norse to be expanded in, which are warfare, peaceful events, and adventuring. They're each a little bit different, so let's just go into them in turn, basically, and start out by talking about warfare. So the first thing that I've added into the warfare column is raiding. Now, as a tribal ruler, you can already raid. There are already mechanics for that inside of Crusader Kings 3 in the base game without this DLC. What it's going to do is further enhance that. Now, the ways that it's going to do that is it's going to add 2 new Dynastic Legacies, and we're going to talk about those just a little bit later. But one of them is very much focused around pillaging, which is, of course, raiding, and you really can't explore Viking culture, particularly Norse culture, without including raiding. So that's pretty cool. It kind of adds things back to CK2, so there was very good Viking content inside of CK2, so I can kind of see why it was perhaps natural for them to include this as their first flavor pack. So in addition, they will also be adding trial by combat, which is a special type of duel, and will specifically advance Norse leaders. So that's pretty exciting, and you can tell why the dualistic mechanic is going to be added into the 1.3 patch. Interestingly, I'm sure I caught a very slight mention in one of the videos that dueling your rival is actually a martial trait or a martial perk. So it'll be interesting to see if you specifically have to earn that to be able to do it, or if it's just an interaction you will gain by having a rival. We don't yet know, so I guess we'll find out. So that will be for everyone, but trial by combat looks like it will be specific to the Norse culture. And I'm looking forward to seeing just how that integrates. I think it's going to be very event-driven. Obviously, the dualistic stuff is event-driven, as I mentioned in my previous video. But I think it's going to have a very, obviously, distinctly Nordic flavour to it. So that would be pretty cool. In addition, I've included under the warfare section the new goals for the Norse. So there are 2 main goals that they mentioned in the video. I mean, there could well be more. But they mentioned specifically the High Kingdom of the North Sea, which is basically taking the British Isles and Scandinavia and creating basically a kingdom out of forming those 2 together. And there'll be a little bit more on that later. And the other one is kind of going in the other direction. So if you go to the east, then you can actually create the capital of the Rus. So I'll be curious to see if there are more goals, or if those are the only two. But those are certainly the only ones that they mentioned across all of the content that I've seen so far. So that's pretty cool as well. And lastly, I'm going to mention at this point Shield Maidens, and Yom Vikings. So basically, they didn't really explain exactly how they're going to work. I've got a feeling that the Yom Vikings are going to be working like a holy order based on what they said, but obviously a very Norse-specific holy order. Whereas Shield Maidens, they didn't necessarily say it, so I'm not sure if they're going to work like a holy order. I suspect that Shield Maidens are going to basically work kind of like a knight, in that they will be able to fight for you, but it looks like they will also have some other interactions that you'll be able to play with as well, and we'll discuss those a little bit later on in the video. Lastly, I did see a mention of events that would allow you to send your children to the Varangian Guard, and again, they didn't necessarily go into too much detail around that, but I think again it's very flavourful, and it may provide more options for warfare, obviously, because you're sending them into this militaristic organisation. So that's pretty cool. The next thing we're going to talk about is the Dynastic Legacy trees, which have been reworked. So adventuring and pillaging are the two new dynastic trees that are going to be added. It looks like they're going to be specific to the Norse culture, or at least I hope they are, otherwise they won't make sense. So it looks like they've reworked a whole bunch of dynastic perks anyway. That was something that was mentioned as part of the 1.3 patch. So I suspect some of that is perhaps in balance for the things that they're adding here. But again, we don't have any more information at this stage, so we'll just have to wait and see when it drops, which is not that far away, so I'll do a video when it does land. But yes, it looks like we've got adventurers and pillaging, basically. And they're two very different sort of things, really. So pillaging allows you to just be better at being a Viking, really, in terms of increasing all your loot and your plunder. I'll make an example pop up that I've seen from one of their videos around the Sea Wolves perk that you can take, which gives you +1 prowess, plus 20% naval speed, and prestige and fame from battles goes up by a pretty humongous 100%. And it only costs you 250 renown. So that last part, I think, is part of the 1.3 patch, where they mentioned that they were rescaling the way that dynasty perks worked. So they no longer progress 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, etc., etc. Now they'll be easier to obtain the first few perks in the tree, but much harder to gain the later perks. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out when we have all of the full costs put in front of us. But yeah, that example there of that Sea Wolves perk, I think just gives us an idea of the pillaging thing, very much for making them very good at being raiding Vikings. Getting all that prestige is really good for a tribal ruler. Obviously, having faster naval speed will allow them to get there faster and also avoid conflict that they want to get out of. And yeah, just +1 prowess is just good, right? So I think all of those are really good. The other side of the tree is the Adventurers Dynastic Legacies, and the Adventurers are really quite interesting, and I think they deserve their own section, really, to talk about. Adventures essentially allow you to kind of pack up your things and go and settle a new land. So you could decide that you want to go and settle maybe in a part of England, and maybe move over to there, and then gradually move over and assimilate into that culture and set up a new kingdom. And I guess there's historical precedence for this, and I think if you've seen the TV show Vikings as well, it's a big feature of that as well, naturally. So I think that's pretty cool. You can seek help from glory-seeking Huskarls to help you go and fight that and claim that little bit of land for yourself. As I said, you gradually assimilate into that new culture. But even if you decide to not do this for yourself, they've mentioned that even landless characters who have gained some form of influence will then go out themselves and try to, gather enough support to go and do this by themselves. So even if you decide, no, I'm going to play Norse and I want to stay in Scandinavia and I just want to pillage and raid, well, it looks like the AI will have historical targets of significance. So I guess you can think northern France, Britain, places like that, and they're going to go out and try and create these little enclaves that they will eventually assimilate into. So I think there's some really awesome roleplay options there, as well as maybe even consider it as almost like a little bit of feature for non-Norse cultures as well, because suddenly if you're playing in England, for example, you're going to have to consider this threat that you previously didn't have to, or at least you didn't have to as much. So it looks like this is all of this DLC is being set in the early start date, which again, it makes sense for the Vikings, that their era of being particularly powerful is really at the start of the game as opposed to the later start. So I think it's looking interesting. I'm certainly excited to see how the adventure system works. It looks like it builds a number of events in there as well. But yeah, I'm very excited to play with that, and it sounds really, really cool. Now, I've called this next section Peaceful Northmen. As I mentioned, it looks like there's some stuff around warfare, there's things around adventures, and then lastly, peaceful events as well. And they said that they wanted to put a little bit of emphasis into the fact that Norse culture isn't just about warfare. There is actually a lot of trading as well. So they've said that there are events that are in the game specifically around trading, and I think even the adventures build into that a little bit. So I guess that will be interesting to see whether or not you can establish yourself in new lands and then maybe improve relations around you by embarking on trade. That could be really interesting. Again, we don't have any specifics about how it's integrated yet, but we don't have that long until we'll find out. They also talked about having tons of peaceful events, as well as shield maidens having an off the battlefield effect as well, so protecting you from plots, making sure that you don't get assassinated. Sounds really cool. So it sounds like they have a nice effect across more than just being a knight. They also have an off the battlefield effect, so that's quite cool as well. They mentioned the blood sacrifices. So if you've managed to go and pillage yourself a bunch of Christian prisoners, then you can put them to the sword, and you can basically gain piety for doing that, basically, which is, again, if you've watched the Vikings show, then that's a kind of a big feature of the sort of thing that's in there. So I think all of that's quite cool. But like I said, they mentioned that there were many events, and the ones that I could piece together from the different videos that I've watched and from their marketing materials listed things like escaping thralls, traveling mystics, visiting berserkers, braggart wanderers, and then they mentioned family events as well. So they tried to mention things like having snowball fights with your children or going sledding and things like that, which I guess makes sense given that they're also adding that aforementioned winter UI and sound pack into the game as well. So it sounds, all of this together sounds really quite cool. I'm looking forward to it. If you already have the season pass, then obviously you're going to get this anyway. If you don't, I just had a quick look on Steam, and it was just under £6, I think, when I looked at it. I will make for great radio and go and check that right now while I do this. But yeah, it was around £5 or £6. I don't know what that would be in your local currency if you're not based in the UK. That's where I am based. But it's not breaking the bank. So £5.19 is what I can see on here. So again, it's just a flavour pack. So it's going to have some unit, probably some unit effects as well. You'll have some different graphical portraits for the units, I would suspect, and some different music. I think they mentioned there are 2 new tracks, I think, in the game as well. So that's nice. None of this is needed if you are not looking to buy DLC. I think you can have a perfectly good game experience with the base game, particularly with all of the things that are in 1.3. I mentioned at the start of the video that I've already done a video on that, so if you want to go and check what's in there, go back and do that. But I think, you can play this base game perfectly fine. If you go, you know what, don't care about Vikings, then you don't need to get this DLC and you'll still be able to have a good time. But it doesn't break the bank, at least, and like I said, if you've already got the season pass, then hooray. I'm excited for it. I'll be making some content for it. Obviously, I do tutorial videos on this channel as well, so actually going in and using this as a reason to create the raiding mechanics and explain how tribal things work is probably a good thing. I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to get to that because there are still some things that I want to do in the tutorial series. But again, more content is good. More content's exciting. I think that pretty much wraps up everything that I've managed to collate from looking at all these different things. I don't want to pad this video out any longer than it necessarily needs to be. So if you do have any comments or questions, or even if you want to influence some playthroughs that maybe I'll be posting soon, then by all means drop them into the comments, and I will assure you that I will at least answer you, and I may even create some content off the back of anything you ask. So please go ahead and do that. But that is enough for me from now. I don't want to continue to waffle. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.